You what, me? No.
Hello and welcome to your award-winning The Reasons I'm Broke podcast, bringing you the reasons we're broke every single week, normally through news and headlines, but this week it is a bonus episode as we discuss Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, and the other person helping me with these co-hosting duties is someone that I know is probably, it's between him and Bobby on who is the biggest Spider-Man fan, because you're both neck and neck on this one, but this is a guy that I used to work with who is still at the old comic shop and who is moving forward in that store and in the field. So someone who knows Spider-Man very well, and I especially knew when I was working with him, he'd put on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse as soon as it hit Netflix, and any other thing that was his fandom, like Indiana Jones, he made sure to play it at the shop. So I want to welcome Sean, making his debut here on the show and helping out with this review. Welcome on, Sean.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And Sean, we will touch on some of the stuff that he does on the side at the very end of the show, things like cosplaying, which you may have seen him online for it. But we're going to keep this pretty loose as far as the reviews. I know we used to do a stricter format a couple years ago, but I find like the free flow conversation is a little bit better, and some of you may have seen my thoughts on Instagram, on Twitter already on this film, but I want to go a little bit heavier on it. Maceo and I talked about this movie last week, but again, Maceo hadn't seen it yet, and I was still kind of baking in my thoughts on the movie, like truly going deep and finding all the Easter eggs, especially on Twitter, that people are pointing out. But let's start it off with you, Sean. So just a little background on you. What was your first exposure to Spider-Man? And what makes him compelling? Not necessarily Miles, but just the character of Spider-Man. What makes him one of your favorites, if not your favorite?
I think my initial intro into any Spider-Verse was probably with the 90s animated series. I used to watch that and the X-Men animated series all the time when I was a kid, and I was I was born early 90s, so I didn't really see it till towards the end, so I was mostly reruns, but I just loved the show. And then they started coming out with the Toby movies, and I remember I'd go to I think it was a Borders or something, but I would get those big epic collections where they reprinted a bunch of the comics. They were all in just black and white so they could mass produce them, but I would get all those the 1960s era Spider-Mans, and I would just read those nonstop. I always thought he was kind of compelling, and I mean, I think that's what they've always said about him, is that even though he has these superpowers, he's very much kind of an everyman. He's very easy to identify with. Especially when he was in high school, it's when you're going in school, you have maybe a bully, or you're nervous to ask out the person you like or something, and Peter was always dealing with that on top of trying to also be a superhero. So I think it was stuff like that that always made him easy to identify with, because it's he felt like he was kind of going through the same stuff as you, but maybe it also made you think maybe you didn't have it so bad because you didn't have to fight the Green Goblin or something on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I like that you bring up the relatability of the character, and it's kind of interesting. Some characters fans don't have to relate to, but I think it's the tragedy behind the character that I think a lot of people especially latch onto. For example, Batman. I'm not a martial arts expert. I'm not rich. I'm not as halfway as smart as Bruce. But that tragedy that compels him to continue to do what he does for Gotham, I think we can all kind of relate to that hurt. And Peter is someone who has a lot of that in his life as well. I don't know the character as well as you do, but that's definitely something that propelled him into the work that he does now. And it's very simple with Uncle Ben or Bruce Wayne with his parents. They have this catalyst that I think we all kind of latch on to, sympathize with, whatever it is that keeps us compelled to read the character. And one of the things I remember is when Andrew Garfield, for example, was cast, and I kept hearing things like, he's not nerdy enough, or he's too good looking to be Peter. And it's go back to the old, and because you're collecting all the Spider-Man comics, the old ones especially, you go back to those old pages and it's not a nerdy looking guy. It's actually a regular looking person in high school, not an ugly guy, not a nerdy looking guy. It's just a guy. And that's one of the things that people kept pointing out. Like, if you go back to his origin, he's just a regular kid that happens to be incredibly smart and has a crush on a girl, which any person in high school had that girl that they had a crush on or whatever. So, I mean, when you look back at those old comics, can you confirm that, especially since you're the one who's actually collecting these things?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I feel like his first in the Amazing Fantasy 15, like, you know, they drew him with like the glasses and stuff, but like once he became Spider-Man, like he started to come out of his shell a little more. So he never was always just like, you know, hi, I'm the, you know, the dweeby guy. Like he was just, you know, like he liked science, but like ultimately, like when Gwen got to know him, when Harry got to know him, you know, they're like, oh, you know, he's a pretty cool guy. Like obviously, like, I mean, not far into his Spider-Man career, he had Mary Jane and Gwen going after him. Harry was always trying to hang out with them. Like, so he wasn't, you know, that bad of a dude to hang out with. He was just book smart, you know?
Exactly.
But that's why I always like that. Like, I'll just say this early on. My favorite live action version of Spider-Man is Andrew Garfield, but I always kind of identified with his version a little more because he seemed like I think his movies came out when I was like maybe just getting into college, but he felt kind of like me or friends I knew like in high school. Like, you know, we were like, you know, nerds or kind of, you know, socially awkward, but it wasn't like, you know, you didn't have to be like, hi, I'm wearing, you know, a sweater vest constantly and I'm like 1960s Peter Parker, you know, or something. It felt like, for me, it was like, oh, that kind of feels like a modern day equivalent. So when people said he wasn't nerdy enough, I was like, dude, the dude's developing photos like in his bedroom at his house. Like he's pretty nerdy. I don't know.
Right. One of those yearbook kids type of
yeah,
thing.
Yeah.
Well, with Miles himself, this is a character that obviously people love Peter, but Miles is one that, especially in the newer generations, the younger ones, became wildly popular. I was working at the store when Miles took over as Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe. And that was kind of a big deal. I've shared the story before where the local news came into the shop and they wanted to ask the workers, like, they kept spinning it, right? Like, Spider-Man is black now? Are they turning him black? Or they killed off Peter and this is the new one? And obviously the owner and one of the other workers explained, well, Peter's fine. The Peter that everyone knows is okay. That's in the main universe. This is an Ultimate Universe. And that's what we got out of the first film a couple years ago. And I feel like, yeah, the comics for Miles have done pretty well. It hasn't been, you know, to the size of like ASM or anything like that, but it's got its fan base. But when this first film came out, Into the Spider-Verse, that really propelled the character in popularity. I mean, a lot of people came in wanting to buy Miles Morales merch. You had people that were black, people that were Latino, people that were white. I mean, they were all relating to the character, and especially for people of color, like, oh, cool, this is like the first, I guess, predominantly in the spotlight Spider-Man that the general audience has been exposed to. Obviously, we had other Spider-Man in the past that were not white, but this is the one that was really center stage and out there, and that first film was a hit. So with Miles, in relation to you, before we go into this sequel, you know, I do want to ask you where your fandom for Miles Morales started and what you thought of that first film going into the second one.
Well, I'd definitely say Into the Spider-Verse inspired me to get to know Miles way more than I had originally. And nothing against Miles in particular, but I was never, when I was younger, I wasn't a huge fan of the Ultimate Universe. Like I'd picked up, unfortunately, I think I had started with like the Ultimates and I read some of those and it was like, I was still at this like weird age where it was like it's like I understood they were retelling the story, but I was like, oh, they changed this. This is weird. And so now I've actually gone back and reread a lot of Ultimate stuff and I've had kind of a new appreciation for it. But for me originally, I was like, well, it's like they took my favorite characters and they were kind of like, well, what if everyone was a dick, you know? And so I never really got into it much. And like, it was a little grittier and I don't know. I just was like, I don't know. I'll stick to like the original stuff. Like I was very much like, kind of like a young hipster, I guess. I was like, oh, this is the way it was meant to be intended. So I never fully got into Ultimate Spider-Man. I didn't read it enough to get to the point where they transferred to Miles. So my first real big meeting with him was Into the Spider-Verse. And that movie, like, I mean, I was like in awe. So I've gone since then. I picked up the trade paperbacks of like his original run, and the fact that I've seen like the stuff they took and put into the movie. I've been like, oh, I should have read this back in the day, because it's like it's spot on. I mean, now that movie for me, I mean, I tell people like, yes, I'm maybe partially biased because I love Spider-Man, but I'm like, honestly, not only do I think is this like the best Spider-Man movie, it's just one of my like, it's on my list of like my personal favorite movies of all time. Like, it's just a good movie. Like, I can't praise it enough, honestly.
Yeah,
that was probably my first foray into Miles. It was that one.
And it's a very solid entry. I agree with you. I mean, this is one of those examples that I, once again, like anytime people trash the Sony Marvel universe, I'm always like, they have way more hits than they have misses. I mean, in Spider-Man alone, like let's say we don't put in, something like Venom or any of the other characters, like even if you were to just take Spider-Man, like holy shit, they made one of the best superhero films of all time. And as you were saying, a good film, like just a good solid movie. There's very few of those that are both a superhero movie and a good film. And Spider-Verse is definitely one of them. And it's one that I really enjoyed. It's one my son likes. He's a little young still. He's 5, and some parts scare him, like the Prowler scenes when he's crawling around the apartment and stuff. But he still likes it, and he enjoys it a lot. So going into this sequel, I mean, the bar had been set really high, I think. And it's hard to not compare the two. But with this one, it is a part 1 of 2. That's one of the things I think. Touching on the first thing, the animation, I think it not only maintained its quality, but I felt like, and I don't know if you got the same thing, but that somewhere along the lines of production, they were able to do more with this type of animation. They were able to put in more of Gwen's world. They were able to have all of the hundreds, if not thousands, of different Spider-Men in their own different styles, like Spider-Punk, for example, who's constantly shifting in backgrounds and everything. That I don't know if they could have done in the first film with whatever budget they had, with the technology they had back then. They learned a few tricks, I'm assuming. And so I think even the animation did get bumped up in quality in this sequel.
Yeah. I mean, it was crazy. I mean, able to bump it up without like losing the charm of the first one. Like I was thinking about it today because we were going to be talking about this, and it's just like, I mean, it's like they managed to like take digital animation and like mix every form of like art medium into it, and it gives it such like a brand new but like old fashioned quality to it. Like I don't know, for me it kind of saved animated movies. Like, not that I don't like animated movies, but there's some stuff, especially with like a lot of like current Disney Pixar, like while it's gorgeous, there's a lot that feels kind of cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you want to just see something different, and the way they can push the envelope with this, like, I mean, it's like stuff you're like, how are my eyes comprehending like everything I'm seeing right now? But it's like it feels like at times you're like, looking at a newspaper strip or a comic book, a cartoon you used to watch, and then like suddenly it's like pure watercolor like art, like Gwen's world, like you were saying. Just the fact that they can do all that and make it feel seamless as well and not like disjointed. I mean, it's absolutely incredible to me. Like, I keep going for hours just about that, like just looking at it. Yeah.
I wanted a whole movie just in the style of that vulture at the beginning of the movie.
Oh my God. Yes. Yeah.
Victorian era, whatever that was.
Yeah. He's like, I loved his like Italian Renaissance accent,
that's like, it, yeah, Renaissance. Yeah, I love that part. And in case anyone needs the spoiler warning, yeah, we're going to go into spoilers, and that's your warning now, in case the very beginning vulture part got spoiled for you. But it's a cool part. We don't do it justice. You got to see it if you haven't. So that's your spoiler warning. As we go into the story itself, so the first one was about him growing into the role of Spider-Man, into starting to fill in those shoes for his universe as Spider-Man. This one is him going against every Spider story that there is. It's about him breaking canon in his universe, and now breaking canon in a different universe. This is what the Spider-Man 2099 is telling him, which causes a rift in the whole Spider-Verse. It seems like that it could bring down all of existence for them. So it's this message of, you weren't meant to be Spider-Man. And this is coming off of right after he came off of this whole film of, I am Spider-Man. I think that's the final line of that first one. And now everyone tell him, no, you're not, and you weren't meant to be. And, I give them credit for this, because I never doubted. I'm glad that they didn't go into this part of the film, which is kind of would have been predictable for like a kid's film, where you'd have that low moment of him thinking, maybe I'm not Spider-Man. Maybe I should have, maybe Peter in my universe should have been alive. And instead he's like, no, I am Spider-Man and I need to do what's right. I need to do the right thing, even if it's against what everyone is telling me.
Yeah, he had that, like, I mean, I enjoyed that too. Like, just during the like the big chase, it's like he had those faltering moments, and it's like it looked like, oh, is he gonna like doubt himself here? And then it would just kind of ignite the fire under more. Like, no, well, like I am Spider-Man now, so like there's nothing he can do about it. Like it was just cool to see him, maintain that forward motion, especially after all the ground he had to cover in the first movie, just to get him to leap off the building, get control of his powers. And like the whole idea of him like breaking canon now, I mean, I keep, my poor wife, she's trying to watch the movie. I keep whispering to her, I'm like, all my theories. I'm like, the Spider-Mans are knowing too much. They shouldn't know what canon is because, their goal should be trying to save whatever person they can. So I was glad that Miles was like, look, I don't know what's supposed to happen. I'm Spider-Man. I'm supposed to save people, especially my family. So I'm going to try anyway.
I love that. Yeah, you're like a Star Wars fan. Like, I think this is what's gonna. I did the same thing with Kelly, probably not to the level that you did, but I told her, I'm like, by the third film, I bet you that since he is because I don't know if you got the same message of it, but by him getting bitten by the multiverse spider that created him, he is almost an origin of sorts to these. I feel like him breaking canon for these universes are not going to destroy those universes because he is affected by a multiverse spider. Like, that's going to be the message that by the third film, he's going to be like, no, I can break canon and it's okay. And the universe isn't going to be destroyed. You're pointing to Miguel. You're from your universe going into another one. And I've already breached the universes by being, getting my powers from a different universe's spider. So I almost feel like he's going to be the special one or the exception to that rule. And he can save other people in other universes without breaking down that world.
Yeah, he might be like a perfect counter to whatever the Spot is going to do. Like Spot might be unraveling universes, but Miles can, web them back up, so to speak.
And I think the Spot was like, I know people point to the world that in the Indian world where it was all breaking down, and I think it was the Spot. Like they were blaming Miles. And they had it all contained or whatever, but they were like, yeah, you broke canon, so this is why this world is. I'm like, I think you're right. I think it is Spot that's actually doing these things, and it's Miles is actually, like you were saying, in a way, fixing these worlds. And it's gonna be hard for Spider-Man 2099 to accept. And I do want to go into his, because that was one of my criticisms about the film, is that, I mean, do you agree that his origin and his motivation was very similar to Kingpin's in the first film?
Yes, and my thing was I'm not super familiar with 2099. Like I read like the first a good chunk of the first volume, I think. But the whole time like leading up to it, I was wondering like, well, they're making him kind of antagonistic, but like I know he's not a bad guy, so I wasn't sure what they were gonna do. So yeah, with like the whole like loss of the family and sort of thing, I did find it kind of an interesting parallel to Kingpin's problem. I don't know if I took it a bad way or not, because I don't know. It was kind of interesting to see like a hero kind of go through that. Like somebody like Kingpin, you expect him to take it to like whatever he does next is going to be turned up to 11. But to see like a Spider-Man kind of, he's like, become like how Miguel is in the movie, I found it kind of interesting.
Because when I was watching it, I saw that Kingpin, like he was trying to bring his family from another universe into his. And then Miguel pretty much did what Kingpin wanted, lived that life, and ended up ruining the world because he existed in that world. And it's kind of like, this is what would have happened if Kingpin were a good guy and we just let him do what he wanted.
Yeah, so it's like we almost got to see like the rest of that story, so to speak.
It's funny that 2099 fans, and I think also Ben Reilly fans, I feel like they got hosed in this film because, as you were saying, they made 2099 the bad guy. They made fun of Ben Reilly, and I know they have their fan base, so I kind of wanted to see what those fans thought of this film, because they made Ben Reilly into kind of a joke, and then they made 2099 into a bad guy, which I know he's not a villain in the comics. So I'd be kind of curious to see how they feel about them radically changing these Spider-Men. And I know that fan base isn't massive, but they're out there, and I'm kind of curious to see if anyone really cared that they changed these characters so much, these Spider-Men. I mean, if 2099 was my favorite one, it'd be like Batman Beyond being a villain in a future Batman universe film.
Yeah, I guess we all have that kind of at least hope that there's like, kind of that comic book cliche where it's like, the two good guys start out like hating each other, and then, by the end of it, it's like, oh, okay, like I see the error of my ways. We're on the same team now, which I'm sure they'll do, because it would be kind of a weird slap in the face, I guess, like to just completely make him the bad guy. But yeah, Ben Reilly, I was kind of cracking up because I do famously, if like anyone knows me, and I do not like any of the clone stuff in the Spider-Man stories. I do think Ben is cool, like nowadays, but, and, I was wondering, like, what are they going to do? I'm like, Andy Samberg is voicing Ben Reilly. I'm like, this will be interesting. And they kind of made him a goofball. So I'm like, I hope he gets to do something badass in the next one, because he looked dope. His animation was awesome. Like he looked straight out of the, like a McFarlane book or something, but they made him just kind of this cheese ball. So I don't know what they're going to do with him, but I guess we're kind of used at this point. Like some of the Spider-Verse cameos, they're a little humorous take on things, but they end up kind of, surprising us at the end. So I'm hoping hopefully they'll kind of make these guys come back in and give them at least a moment to shine in the next one, even if it's not like, a full plot point.
Yeah, maybe they're united in seeing Miles Morales be able to fix these worlds and not break canon without breaking them. And then they're able to team up with the bigger villain, which is Spot, who is stronger than ever by the end of the film. You had brought up some of the cameos. I mean, let's go into some of that, because there was a lot of fun stuff in there. Sony obviously leaned very heavily on their Sony universe. We had an appearance into the Venomverse at one point with Spot. They spent like a good minute there. They showed the Andrew Garfield scene, the Uncle Ben death there for quite a bit. So, I mean, yeah, how'd you feel about all those different Spider people and Spider shows and movies that they covered throughout?
Well, I thought it was awesome. I mean, it was just a cool reminder of like the multiverse. So, I mean, it's, ultimately like whatever movies you like, whether you like Toby better or you like Andrew, or, if you like the MCU, like people like, if they don't see their version like in a certain thing, it's like it's almost like if it's not posted on Facebook, it's not official. So whenever for my wife and I, whenever we get to see Andrew represented in another thing, we're like, yes, you see that, people, he's still canon, hell yeah. But I was really impressed of just how many Spider people and like moments they chalked into this movie, and not even ones that like I've ever seen before. And I mean, if you read the Spider-Verse comics, I mean, the background is just filled with Spider-Men and of different takes and sizes, and they did that so well. And to kind of like, I mean, even for a second, each one had their own like personality. Like you could look at a still photo and just imagine the storyline behind each Spider-Man, but they also managed to include some really big fan favorites. So I applaud them for that. I mean, I don't even know what it was like trying to animate all that. I mean, it was crazy.
And I noticed that some people were saying, okay, we didn't see Tom Holland, we didn't see Spider-Man the animated series, and I think they forget that those are Disney owned, so or at least they collaborated with Disney with the Tom Holland one, so they can't just straight up throw them in there. They had like an offhand comment. And I, for one, as you know, and people, Brokettes know that I'm not an MCU guy at all. So I was just kind of like, that's fine. Leave everything out that's MCU Disney out of it. I get that Spider-Man, the animated series, would have been a cool nod, but we did get other cartoons in there for Spider-Man. Like there was that other Spider-Man one that showed up, and they kind of zoomed in on him for quite a bit. And I forget which cartoon that's from, but I'm like, oh, I recognize that Spider-Man. It was after my time, but they included even like one of the kids shows in there.
Yeah, I think it was from a show, The Spectacular Spider-Man, if I recall.
Yeah, that's it.
But I remember I had a few other Spider-Man cosplayers that I follow on Instagram. Everyone, like, when they showed him on the poster with all the Spider-Man, everyone was like losing their minds. And so I was like, oh, cool, he's going to be in it. It was nice that they gave him some like dialogue to Miles with the voice actor. Plus, we saw the return of the 1960s cartoon Spider-Man, and I love that they kept him in two dimensions. That was a cool nod. I think my favorite one I saw, though, of like all of them, was a cowboy Spider-Man on his Spider-Man horse. Yeah. Well, because he's always in every Spider-Verse event, and he's kind of like Wedge Antilles from Star Wars. Like he's in every major battle, but he doesn't always have a lot of dialogue, and he doesn't really do like a ton of stuff, but he's always there. And so to see him actually like in action and just for even a little bit, I was like, amazing. The one I wish they would include is, I don't know if you remember Spiders Man. He's like the Spider-Man from an alternate universe. And he's just made up of like a billion spiders. Like they're all just crammed into a Spider-Man suit. He's horrifying to behold, but he's also hilarious.
And there's plenty of room still, because we got a whole movie still. Actually, two, if you want to count the Spider-Gwen movie, I'm assuming they'll put in some Spider-Verse stuff in that movie, and we'll get to see different Spider people. But with the third film, I mean, which alternate Spider-Man do you want to see show up that hasn't shown up yet?
Well, like we mentioned, the animated series, just because that's like near and dear to my heart from when I was a kid. That would be awesome, just even for a minute, just to have him in there. Like going through my knowledge. Oh, very kind of obscure, but Spider-Man 1602 from the Marvel 1602 that Neil Gaiman did, I think.
Mm-hmm.
He's one of my favorites, and before I was like working in the Ren Fair, whenever the Ren Fair would roll around, I would do like a version of his outfit, and it was basically just like old-timey Ren Fair style Spider-Man, red and blue, like doublet. He talks kind of like in like Shakespearean, like Old English, and he's an interesting one. So I would love to see him like in the background or somewhere.
With the previous movie, we had Spider-Man Noir. We had a couple of the Spider-Pig, for example. Were you as surprised as I was that they didn't appear until basically the very end of the film?
Very much, yes. I mean, especially especially those two. I was going to say Spider-Man Noir instead, but both of them were such fan favorites, especially together. I mean, they had such great one-liners and whatnot. I was glad that they showed them at the end, because I was like, okay, like we're not just going to like, I didn't want it to be one of those movies where it's like, hey, we visited these kind of universes. Let's see what's like next. And we might touch on those again at some point. So I'm hoping they have a decently sized part. I'm guessing maybe because like Nick Cage had, like right after that, he got signed on to more movies than he had been on in a while. And, John Mulaney was doing a new special, like maybe just scheduling, they couldn't fit him in. So they're going to all get on for the next one. But I do want to see Noir come back. I mean, he's always a classic.
Yeah, he is. Was Spider-Pig in that lineup for Spider-Gwen's team? I can't remember. Like, I know Noir was.
I think so, but don't quote me on it. I thought I saw him, but like, it was such a quick moment. I was like absorbing everything on the screen. I don't know if I saw him or not, but I feel like I did.
That'd be good, because I mean, you already had Penny Parker, I think, was the robot one, and then you got Spider-Noir, and that's the only one that's missing out of those, because you got Old Man Parker as well. So it's like you can't have the three and not have the fourth one in there.
That's what I do want to see in the next one, especially also is our Earth 616 Peter. I want to see him back in his like spider suit doing stuff. I know at the end of the last movie when they fought Kingpin, he got back in the Spidey suit, but it's like for both movies, he's always just like dressed like he just woke up. And I'm like, come on, throw our boy back in his Spider-Man suit. I want to see him like wreck some people.
I was telling Kelly that I expected by the second film, because we get the Spider-Man being married to Mary Jane, having a child that also has powers. I thought we were going to get into the comic book where, they're all three of them are fighting crime, right? They each have their Spider-Man suits, and maybe we'll get that by the third film. But I'm glad that at least we got like, okay, it's a little redheaded baby, just like in that comic. Like maybe we're getting
in the background of, I think it's when Miles is running through the like cafeteria of the Spider-Man, sitting on one of the shelves is that Mary Jane from the Renew Your Vows, where she has this. Yeah, she was in the white and red. So I mean, whether or not that's like the same Mary Jane, she's also just out being a Spider-Man without Peter's knowledge, I don't know. But I did see it, and that was another thing. I like grabbed my wife and I was like, "Oh, that's Mary Jane from blah 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 blah."
That whole chase sequence, I bet you were just pointing the whole time. You were fucking, what's his name, from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Leonardo DiCaprio, like on fucking speed.
Oh, yeah, dude, Lewis. Yeah, oh, there he is. Yeah, except like 25 times. I was like, "Oh, that one."
When
sorry, I just wanted to say the Spider-Man that he's, when like they're first looking for him and he's sticking to the back of that like Doc Ock Spider-Man, I think that Spider-Man was voiced by Humberto Ramos, who does a lot of amazing Spider-Man comic art. But I think if I recall, I saw on his Instagram that he posted that he was going to be in the movie, and I think they showed that one. So I think that was his little cameo in the movie.
Did you happen to spot Superior Spider-Man?
I didn't. Now I'm trying to think. Like no, because I kept an eye out, but I didn't see him. I saw like 2 different versions of the PS4 Spider-Man. That's the one I kept seeing everywhere.
Yeah, because I kept looking out. I'm like, oh, are we gonna get Superior Spidey? Like that would have been a neat nod. Like even that character as a main cast member on any of the teams, like that would have been a good one. That would have been a good sidekick to Spider-Man 2099 even. I mean, it's Doc Ock. He's super smart. He's got the powers, and he could have been, instead of, I forgot who else he had besides Ben Reilly helping him, but like the pregnant Spider-Man was there. There was another one, but that would have been a good one to have on that team as like an antagonist if you wanted to. Even though I like Superior Spider-Man, I'm like, no, that would have made sense. Throw him in there, try to catch Miles.
Yeah, maybe that'd be cool if they thought about using him for at least the third one, because I'm sure at least the first part of the movie is still going to be, well, one, dealing with Miles where he's stuck at, but also Gwen and 2099 are looking for them in their own respects. It'd be cool if 2099, if he puts together a new like strike unit, if it had auto on that one.
Since you're the Spidey guy, did you read any Spider-Punk stuff? Because I'm wondering if they changed him quite a bit from the comics in the movie.
The only stuff I really read was from Spider-Verse and like his first appearance. I didn't read the mini-series that came out like in the last year or so, but I know when I read like some of his first stuff, he was very, from what I recall anyway, very like similar in many respects, in that he was like, fight the system, anarchy. I think I remember in the comic I was reading, like him and his band members were fighting against like, what was it, Norman Osborn? I think he was like the head of, I don't know if he was the prime minister, since it was like in London, but they were very much like, fight the system, they were performing in their band. He really just wanted to perform in his band and anarchy. So like some of this dialogue he had about like, not liking the way everything was being and that sort of thing, I felt that jived pretty well. I think they definitely like accentuated his appearance, I think, even more from the comic, but I thought it went well with the Spider-Verse movie style of how they take their takes on the characters.
Okay, that's good to know, because each Spider-Man kind of has their gimmick, and I felt like for Spider-Punk, like, yeah, fight the system, so that works well like when you want him to go against Spider-Man 2099, but I didn't know if they just took that, they're like, oh, he's a punk, so let's make him anti-establishment, and that'll be a good foil for 2099, and he can help Miles, like that'll be his gimmick. So I didn't know if that was different from the comics, since they do take some liberties with some of the characters, like even with Miles, they make him a little bit goofier in the movies than they do in the comics, but yeah, for Spider-Punk, that's pretty cool. I'm glad that they kept it pretty loyal to the actual comics.
Yeah, from what I've seen, they might, accentuate someone's characteristics a little bit, or in, some aspects, if they're like, well, this guy's going to be a cameo, let's just kind of make him a little goofy or funny for this part. Or, if he's a serious character, we'll make him like over dramatic, kind of like Ben Reilly or somebody. But I feel like when they need to, they really highlight exactly who the character is, even if you haven't read the book, so you get a good idea of who they are.
One of the other things I did have an issue with, and this is why I said it last week, I like the first Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse more than this one. And it's, the pacing was a big thing for me. Like I kept noticing that in the movie, and I don't know if it's because it's the product of the fact that this is a part 1 instead of a part 2. So it doesn't have a standardized parts 1, 2, or 3 act. That if it does, I didn't notice it, or it was kind of muddied in there with everything else that they put in. But I had an issue with how often they paused to continue to kind of hammer the audience over the head with this relationship that he had with his parents, constant rift between the two, and then his mom, and then they're kind of putting things together, but then they're not because he's grounded again. And I felt like the pacing was my biggest issue with the film, because it's like, all right, we're getting going. Okay, we got to stop now and have a 5-minute conversation with his mom. Stop. Okay, now we got to have another 5-minute conversation with his dad as Spider-Man. So like I understood what they were doing, and they were that parallel was there with Spider-Gwen as well. But I felt like it hurt the pacing quite a bit, where I was kind of like, all right, well, what are we doing now? Did you kind of feel that way a little bit?
Yeah, I felt it was, compared to the first one, like even more, like you're saying, like dialogue heavy. I didn't mind it so much because I felt like, well, one, we didn't get like a lot of him and his mom in the first one, so I was digging to see that, and I felt like they were kind of trying to catch us up on exactly like what he's been doing as Spider-Man. Like a lot with like Peter Parker and like the cartoons and the movies. It's like we know like he's always struggling to find that balance. So it's like they had to show us like, for the last couple years now, Miles has been struggling. Like, here's what's been going on. But yeah, it did get, there was a lot of like, coming back to the parents, having almost the same conversation a few times. But yeah, so it was kind of like, I guess on both sides of that coin, like I at least enjoyed seeing them dedicate some more time to seeing his actual like relationship with his parents beyond just him and his dad in the first one. But it was a different feel than the last one. Like the last one was kind of, I felt handled it maybe a little smoother, but obviously they need to pack more info into this one. So, I mean, basically it was just Miles going from place to place and getting more and more information from different characters. Like he did a lot of talking in this movie with everybody.
Mm. Yeah, I think it'll hurt it more maybe when I rewatch it, because it's like the first time it's like, okay, I'm learning what's happening. I was actually thinking that they were setting up his mom to die like in the comic books. And I know they undid it, but in the books, like in that first run, she gets killed off by Venom. And I'm like, oh man, they're focusing a lot on the mom. Like, are we going to lose her? Is that going to be like, instead, like he missaw the vision and it's actually his mom that dies or whatever? But it sounds like they're doing something else instead with the third. But with so I don't know, when I rewatch it, I don't know if I'll be fast forwarding through some of those scenes. We'll see. But I was kind of surprised that the end with when they brought back Uncle Aaron, I thought that was great. But the fact that they kept him like fully evil, I was like, that hurt, man, because I like Uncle Aaron.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was like a neat little twist, though. I don't know, like my wife and I got hyped. Like we were just kind of like, oh no, like because they have this like really touching moment when he's like he hugs Uncle Aaron, and then it takes this like turn, and it parallels when he captured Peter B. Parker in the first movie and tied him to the punching bag. And so you're like, oh God, what's going to happen? You think it's just going to be like a normal conversation, but I did enjoy that we get to see the anti-Miles Morales. What the questions that brought up for me though was seeing both of them, Miles and Uncle Aaron, being like fully evil, is like, so now we're seeing a world that because the spider that bit Miles like got taken away, like would that have saved this world from this kind of darkness or whatnot? So I'm wondering if in like the next movie, if it's going to be easy at all, or to try and sway them to the side of good, if that possibility was there before the spider left for our Miles's universe. So I don't know, but yeah, it did hurt to see Uncle Aaron just like just a bad guy now. You're, oh no, after like Miles, he has enough trauma going on right now, please.
I even almost got a little disturbed where I was like, oh, is that his new dad in this universe? Like, does he end up hooking up with his brother's wife? Like they had that
like
sort of
a Hamlet thing going on.
Yeah. I'm like, this is kind of weird. But then he's just like, no, I'll take care of the groceries. I'm like, okay, they're not together like that. And then you see, that his dad ends up dying. But it is something that you were saying, he could point to Miles and say, look, this is the universe where there is no Spider-Man and there was never a Spider-Man. I am that Spider-Man. If I hadn't gotten bitten, that's what I got confused with. And Kelly tried to explain it to me, but I didn't quite get it. If Spider-Man had not gotten bitten in the first film, wouldn't his Spider-Man still have died? Like she was telling me that by him getting bitten, that he changed the course of things, and that's why the other Peter died. And that's kind of what 2099 was trying to say. But I'm almost like thinking that Spider-Man would have died anyway.
Yeah, well, like 2099, Miguel was saying, because he got distracted by Miles, that's what caused him to die. Because if you remember, Spidey's fighting Green Goblin at the Super Collider, and he takes off, like he knocks Goblin down, and he kind of swings off to go like where he was going to go put the chip in. And then Miles falls off that ledge and he stops and goes back and saves Miles. And then they have that little conversation. They realize they're both Spider-Man. And then he's like, okay, you hang out here. I'm going to go stop this thing. And then when he goes up there, Prowler is there. So I'm wondering if he meant like, so if Miles had been there, Spider-Man would have been able to swing up there without like an interruption and stop the super collider. And that would have, you know, he would have maybe fought Prowler, but got out of there without a massive explosion. But because Miles happened along, because he was Spider-Man by that point, it was like a ripple effect, you know, it was a little change in what was meant to be. And it caused enough little differences like almost like a what if, you know, and it just, that altered it that way.
One of the things that I feel like would also convince 2099 is if there was another universe where there's another Miles Morales Spider-Man, because throughout all those Spider people, I'm like, there's no way that's the only Gwen Stacy with superpowers, or that's the only Miles Morales with superpowers. So maybe that's why they wouldn't show a variant to Miles, because then, yeah, he'd point to like, look, there's another Miles right there. How come he can exist? Like, why is he not trouble?
Yeah, I wonder if that's something they'll save for the third movie, to have him like a come to Jesus moment where, like, you know, some sort of alternate future Miles that's been Spider-Man for years will be like, yeah, this is how things are supposed to go. Like, you know, like, I mean, somebody's got to tell Miguel at some point, like, I mean, it's not good to know like what's going to happen, because like I said, the main, like if you like, especially in the first movie, you watch Spider-Man, like they know they can't always save everybody, but they always try. Mm-hmm. So to kind of be like, damn, you know, that's a canon event that guy's supposed to die. Like what do they expect Miles to do? Literally sit and watch? Like he's Spider-Man. Like he's got to do something. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's almost that conversation. It all comes back. Zach is the blueprint, Sean. It's the conversation with that he has with his dad of like, what was I supposed to do? Just let him die? And obviously we know the answer because Superman's going to try to save anyone. But his dad's like, I don't know, maybe not. I don't know the answer. He's answering as a dad of like, I want to say yes. You let them die and you save yourself, because that's what any father would say. But he gives a responsible answer. And this is like the evil side of it, of Miguel going, yeah, you can't save these people because that's going to destroy you're going to kill more people by saving one.
Yeah. And I mean, and his thing, what I found interesting was like, you know, Miguel didn't save anyone from dying. He just jumped in and started living in another universe. And that's what caused that one to really unravel, you know, and now he's pushing that on everyone else. Like, you can't try and do this because it'll just destroy everything. And it's like, well, Miguel, you're the one that messed up. Like, we don't know for sure, like, what's going to happen. Like, we can't just always predict the future, like just because we have an algorithm or something, you know?
Plus, does he know for a fact that because he's in that world got destroyed? I mean, couldn't it have been the Spot? The Spot can obviously see through time. We saw that Miles saw a future or various futures, and Spot can see that as well. I mean, who's to say that Spot didn't go back and fuck up Miguel's world just to make him a villain?
That would be interesting too. Yeah, just because then Miguel would have that realization. That might be this thing that could push him back to being like a good guy, right, and team up with Miles, be like, oh, because it would lift that burden from him too, and he wouldn't have to brood so much.
Yeah. Or if they're able to, if Spot, because we know Spot's not fully, I don't know, like he feels disrespected by Miles. He's taken as like this giant joke, but then he's like, well, I'm going to keep getting powerful and I'm going to show you that I'm not a joke. One of the possible endings could be, him seeing the errors of his way and being able to give Miguel his life back. However he lost his family, give that back to him. I don't know.
Like reverse his powers and
and
re-engineer universes.
Undo his own powers even, so that he is not cursed with the Spot.
I do want to mention real quick. I really enjoyed that they took like a character that has been frequently used as like a plethora of other like lame side characters and gave him such a spotlight, I guess pun intended. But I really enjoyed seeing, because I have some of the comics of the, like when the Spot first showed up, and he was also in the 90s cartoon, which I keep shouting out this 90s cartoon. They kind of made Spot a threat in that, because that's like how Mary Jane in that cartoon like got sucked into another universe. Like they actually did the first iteration of the Spider-Verse was in that 90s cartoon. It all started because of Spot. But in the comics, it's like they didn't know what to do with him except make holes and Spider-Man would punch himself. So they kind of made him lame. But by the end of the movie, I'm like, oh God, this guy looks terrifying. Like, I don't know what they're going to do.
When he's fully Spot, like just no white anywhere. He's fully like a hole.
Yeah. And he's like that like weird scratchy pencil sketch, kind of like, I described him, he looked kind of like a Pigpen from the Peanuts, Charlie Brown. Like he just had all the lines around him. I'm like, damn, this guy's going nuts.
Like another art style that they unveiled in this film with that by the very end. It's like, oh, cool. Now I want to go into that world. Let's see a whole universe of that.
Also, I don't know if you've seen it online now, but everyone's sharing that moment of when Miles threw the bagel at the damn scientist in the first movie, and they keep like cutting to like this really dark, ominous music of like it's like origin music and showing the Spot. And just the way that moment has like that's his villain origin story, and the way they handled it in the movie too. I don't know if you caught this, but they zoom in on him when the bagel hits him and his scream kind of like echoes.
Yes.
Like it sounds like, any other villain, they're getting electrocuted and becoming Electro or something. This bagel hits him and just the way, I was cracking up. I was like, oh, this is amazing. It was another way that movie balances the humor and like the serious. Like you'll have this kind of, well, this guy is kind of a dork. And then, like I said, by the end of it, you're like, oh God, like this guy's like a God level threat.
Yeah, this is exactly what I was telling Maceo. I don't want to repeat the exact thing the exact example, but the gist of it is, this is what I like about Sony handling the Marvel Universe is they don't undercut all of those moments with a joke. Like I'll give a different example. Like if at the very end, when he saw the evil Miles, there would have been a quip in there if this were the MCU. But instead, like Sony is okay with having have the audience be uncomfortable in moments. Like they're fine with it. And that's what I like. It's like, let us live in that moment. Don't immediately cut into a joke because you're afraid that the audience can't feel too low and they can't feel only the highs. Can't get too many lows.
I mean, damn, they killed Spider-Man on screen in the first movie. And
that's right.
They didn't have like dialogue once he passed, like
Uncle Aaron.
Yeah, shoot. I've been having rants at work. I mean, you know how I feel about like the current state of the Thor movies. And one of my coworkers threw on Love and Thunder just to see me react while I was working. And, I tried to watch, like, I'm like, all right, cause I was about to leave and I'm like, I'll stop and like, look at this 5 minutes as I'm heading out the door and just see what it is. And it was awful. Like, I mean, but even like the jokes they were trying to put in to undercut some serious stuff were just so forced. I'm like, the actors don't even look like they're having fun. So it's nice to see something that still has the balance. And I mean, like you and I used to say, like Captain America, First Avenger, like stuff like that back when it was the early days. Like, yes, it would have humor, but it was like they knew how to balance it. So movies like this, where it's like, I'm not looking for, deadpan serious the whole time. Like it's fun to have the fun, but when it's an emotional moment, it's like, they know to make it real for people. I respect that because you can't just shy away from that. I mean, that's part of life.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's I think that's the kind of stuff that makes these movies stand the test of time. Maybe 5 generations from us, people will have moved on and they won't remember these animated ones anymore, or there'll be better stuff. Who knows? But at least for the moment, people still talk about Into the Spider-Verse, and people will talk about Across the Spider-Verse and its sequel. As much as I didn't like the movie, or I didn't like certain parts of the movie, overall, I like the movie, and the audiences are liking it as well. It's outperforming the first one. The budget on this one was only $100 million when you don't take in marketing, of course, but the production budget was $100 million, and it already surpassed that easily. And it's going to keep going into week 2 with Transformers, into week 3 with the fucking Flush. Like kids aren't going to they're not going to want to go see the Flash. Families are not going to go see that. They're going to go see Spider-Verse again. Just look at the Mario movie. There is a hunger for family animated films, and Spider-Verse I think is going to be that. It's got legs, and it's going to continue going into the next couple. I think into the next 4 weeks even.
Yeah, and it reminds people that animation doesn't always have to be, just for like the very young child, and not even just something that there's some jokes thrown in here for the parents that are watching. Like, I mean, you could throw on Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse. You can throw on these movies at any point in your life and it'll still be relevant. It'll still be powerful.
Mhm.
And like, that's why it's on my list of like, when I tell people like best movies of all time, I'm like, yeah, it's an animated movie, but like, damn, I mean, I throw that movie on every once in a while and it still blows me away. It's like, you got to stop what you're doing and just watch it. And so it's just so well made. It's perfect.
As we kind of sort of wrap up our thoughts of the film towards the end, at the very end, I mean, it ends on a cliffhanger, which I know I talked to Nick, for example, another host on the show, and he was like, I kind of wish they had marketed the fact that it's a part one even more, because it sounds like he was taken aback by that. Like, oh man, like this is it. This is the end. And even Kelly was like, towards the end, when the other Miles shows up, she's like, man, how much more are they going to fit into this? Like, they kind of got to start wrapping it up. And then it ended and she's like, oh, I didn't know it was a part one. And I know even like the audience in my theater were like, oh, I think that was it. And, how do you feel about the way it ended, compared to like the first one or even any other cliffhanger film?
Well, I was telling my wife after the movie, like I ultimately like the first one even better just because like that one had the, the benefit of being able to wrap up the story for the most part at the end. I knew going in it was going to be to be continued, but yeah, there was like for a while I knew they'd been slapping part one onto it, but there was other times I'd seen them promote that I didn't have that. So I knew a lot of people were surprised. And like I was talking to people in the shop who were like, hey, I'm going to go try and see it. Like anything I need to know about. And I was letting them know like, hey, it is a to be continued. I told them it's kind of like the Empire Strikes Back of this like trilogy they're doing. Cause it's like, it's a little bit darker. There's kind of a clip like it, everyone's kind of like, separated and at their lower points. So it's not going to be like everything's fixed for the most part, like the last one. I'm like, that doesn't really mean it's worse than the first one. I just like the first one better because it was this nice, like they had the highs, the lows, and then this, excellent ending. This makes me more excited to see the next one. I'm glad we don't have to wait as long, at least according to their schedule. But yeah, I mean, it's the same as when you watch a TV show. You see that to be continued pop up and you're like, oh, damn, like, come on, like, get you up there,
Yeah, that's the one thing I do wish that it had a more complete type of ending. Like I get that they needed to go into, but for example, like I pointed to Dune Part 1, like they were able to tell a story beginning to end and yes, leave it open-ended. And that's kind of what I was hoping for with this one. But instead it seems like the type of movie that would play better. This is why I haven't pre-ordered this one yet. Whereas the first one, I'm like, as soon as it comes out, as soon as it's up for pre-order, I need to get it on Blu-ray. This one, I'm like, I'm not running to it because I feel like I want to see part 3 right after I see part 2. Like I would want this to be whenever I sat down to watch Across the Spider-Verse, I'm going to sit down for 4 or 5 hours because I want to see the full story in front of me. So that's one of the reasons why I'm like, I don't know if I could just watch part 2 over and over again without part 3.
Yeah, because like I said, that ending, I mean, it's such an intense moment. Like it's always going to, no matter how many times you see it, it'll build you up. And then you see it to be continued and you're like, oh God, like there's no falling action. You're like, well, now I'm at like the high. So it'd be nice to, be able to watch one straight into the other. I hope theaters will do like for a while they were doing like movie marathons, like when the Harry Potter movies came out and Lord of the Rings. And it's like, come in and watch like all of them into the next one. I would love to do that with these.
Yeah, that would be great. And usually that's up to each theater chain. I know AMC is pretty good about that stuff. But yeah, hopefully they do like, hey, come in and watch all 3 all day for this price. And I think people would be all for it. Well, Sean, I'll have one more question to ask you during the outro, but I do want to thank you for being on and helping because I knew I'm like I told you in the DMs, I'm like, this is the first guy I'm going to reach out to because I know he loves Spider-Man and I know you and I have spent many hour like having that movie playing in the background, especially.
Oh yeah, like so, on repeat.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, this is the guy, and if he says no, I'll go to my second choice. But I'm glad you said yes, and you were able to be on for this hour to talk some Across the Spider-Verse. So thank you so much, and please let the Brocat Corps know where they can find you if they want to continue the conversation and what projects you have going on, such as your cosplay page.
Well, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is The Masked Fox, and in between each word is like an underscore. So it's the underscore masked underscore fox. I'm usually posting cosplay, but I also post like, my daily life and whatnot. I'm an actor as well as my wife. So we also are constantly performing. So we have a hand in pretty much everything there, but I'm always down to talk theories and whatnot about movies. So yeah, hit me up on there.
And there will be links in the description of today's episode for where you can find Sean and his Instagram page. Otherwise, on your end, let us know what you thought of Across the Spider-Verse. You can find the link to everywhere you can find us, also in the description of today's episode at thereasonsimbroke.com. Thumbs up, thumbs down, agreed or disagreed. If you know someone else that enjoyed Across the Spider-Verse, let them know about the episode. Let them know, hey, Sean and Daniel just talked about this on this podcast I listened to. You might enjoy the episode, and send them on over, because word of mouth is the most effective when it comes to podcast growth. But thank you once again, Sean, for being on, and to you on the other side for joining us on this bonus episode. I've been Daniel, joined by Sean, and Brokehead Core, all will be well. So, Sean, Sony has already announced a Spider-Gwen spin-off animated movie. What's the other animated either show or movie that you would want to see a spin-off of from Spider-Verse? Like either a character or a group of characters that you think could hold their own film or their own show?
That's a tough one. Well, I know, but like pre-COVID, they had talked about doing a Netflix series or some sort of streaming, series where they would delve more into the Spider-Verse, and whether or not that was like an anthology series that kind of each episode dealt with a different Spider-Man on a different, like kind of like the Edge of Spider-Verse comics that lead up to each event. I think something like that would be pretty cool, just to flesh out the universe a bit. And that way for the people that are like, like there was like that Mary Jane Spider-Man, like dang, she was just a cameo. That was one of my favorite characters. We got an episode just about her. You feel like one of your favorite characters had a little more than a cameo. I think that would be kind of interesting to see.
I'm all in on the Lego Spider-Man one. I know they've done like Lego movies for Spider-Man, but like this Spider-Man where 2099's like, you're one of our best.
Yeah, I'm like, there's more to that story. I got to know why.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, that's a great idea though, Sean. I like that. And I may have heard that too, where they had mentioned they animated Spider-Verse something. But that would be a great idea. Like I know I don't watch Disney Plus, but from what I understand, they have like a Star Wars anime anthology type of thing over there, or like the What If series, I guess, explores like their own different universes of stuff. So if Sony could do like a better version of all of that, like what you were saying, hey, on this 15-minute episode or on this 30-minute episode, we're going to show you the origin of the Lego Spider-Man, or we're going to show you a little bit more of this world. For example, like the Disney Spider-Man princess world that they just had in the comics, where Maleficent is Green Goblin, like that kind of thing. Like that would be amazing, because they don't have to invest heavy in it. Different art style, obviously, for each one, but it's like, hey, let's do, a 6-episode special of these, release them, and then if it's wildly popular, we'll do another anthology of 6 other different ones. And they don't even have to include them in the third film, because it's like, hey, we're just giving you extra stuff. It's just more frosting.
Yeah, that would be pretty incredible. And it's such a juicy universe. It's like you want to see more of it. You don't want it to just end whenever the next couple movies end. So I hope they keep it going as much as people are interested.